Let's look at some of these stories in a bit more detail. Jason Reed joins me on the line. He's the UK lead at Young Voices. Jason, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
There's been a lot of scrutiny, and it's on the front page of the Telegraph today, this week, over Ofsted after what was an extremely traumatic week. Lots of teachers and head teachers have been saying, do you know what, actually, the inspection process that we have to go through as schools is really draconian and really stressful. But Ofsted have come out and they've said, look, we might look at changing the one-word ratings that we give to schools, but the inspections have got to stay.
Yeah, that's right. There's been a huge amount of pressure in the last few days on Amanda Spielman, the Chief Inspector of Schools, on behalf of Ofsted, following the death of Ruth Kelly. And you can see exactly where it comes from, because these one-word summaries of the ratings that they give out, like inadequate or requires improvement, you can see how that would very much hang over your head if you were managing a school and you thought it was about to be branded in the local newspaper as inadequate, and you might have parents panicking and you might fall down the league tables and so on. It does seem like a little bit of an outdated way of doing things, and I think it's good that we're having this little bit of a review, this little bit of a think about how to do what we need to do, of course, inspect schools and make sure that parents have all the right information and that teaching is at the standard that it needs to be, but conveying that in a bit more of a helpful and constructive way, rather than what might feel at times like just slapping a label on a school and that school being stuck with it until Ofsted gets around to inspecting them again.
Yeah, I think there's sort of an acknowledgement that maybe the one word is a bit blunt, but also an acknowledgement to say that there needs to be some reflection after this tragedy before they make sort of any decisions. But clearly they've come under new scrutiny there. The front page of the Mail, Jason, these woke barristers who are refusing to prosecute eco-warriors. Is that a fair analysis of what's happening?
It's an interesting one, that we've had. I think this is the first time that this has happened, certainly that I've heard of, where a load of legal professionals have banded together to sign this declaration. They're calling it a declaration of conscience, that they are going to do everything within their power effectively to keep climate activists, such as representatives of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, out of the courts. Now, this has been reacted to very unfavorably by a number of top people in the legal profession who say that it undermines the rule of law, it undermines the right to a fair trial, and you can see where they're coming from. Part of the declaration relates, for example, to not wanting to defend oil and gas companies, but we live in Britain with a rule of law. We live under a presumption of innocence. Even if you are an oil and gas company, I think you have the right to fair legal representation in court. But I think if you are running an oil and gas company, you haven't got too much of a reason to worry, because it does seem that these lawyers who have signed this declaration are in a bit of a minority. That most lawyers working in the criminal law do still seem willing to accept instruction whenever they get it from the Crown Prosecution Service to defend or to prosecute whoever they have to do, which I think is probably a good thing for all of us. And there's nothing too harmful, as far as I can see, with some lawyers doing a little bit of political campaigning on the side. It's something that can be blown out of proportion a little bit, but we still have the vast majority of lawyers willing to defend everybody, which is what we all need for the rule of law to work in the way that it does.
But also some understanding that there would be fierce condemnation who say, everybody's got to have legal representation, is entitled to a fair trial.
Exactly, and it's a tough situation, especially because I know we're going to be talking about strikes very soon as well. One of the groups that was on strike not too long ago was barristers over the huge issues with backlogs in the court as a result of COVID, and more broadly because they would say of issues with underfunding of the court system and cuts that have been made to legal aid and so on. And so, every little helps, even if it is only 100 or 120 or so lawyers. You do want to have all the lawyers available in the country to be pursuing all the cases that need to be pursued. So this probably isn't ideal either for the government or for the people at the top of the Crown Prosecution Service either.
You mentioned strikes, and I'm looking inside the Times now, and they're saying that the Easter strike by junior doctors, they're going to go on strike for 4 days, poses, from the people they've been speaking to, a real risk to patient safety. While it seems in some areas of the NHS, there's going to be that vote on the 5% pay offer to paramedics and nurses, when it comes to junior doctors, we are a far away, both sides, from reaching any kind of compromise.
We are. The strikes just keep coming thick and fast from almost every direction within the public sector. We heard a few days ago, of course, of RMT, the rail union, managed to reach an agreement, or at least a partial agreement, with Network Rail over pay, although train strikes continue because of disputes with various train companies. The junior doctors' strike is another one that is continuing and is not showing any signs of abating. The junior doctors are not at all happy with the situation, and the government is taking a very hard line. It's not budging from its position. We know that the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has made lots of positive noises about engaging with the junior doctors' leaders at the BMA and so on, and being open to dialogue. But when it comes to actually putting money on the table, it's not yet clear where the middle ground is going to be found.
And what we're hearing from the talks that they've had, that they were fractious and short.
Exactly. There's a lot of tension there. What the doctors are asking for is still a long way away from what the government is willing to offer. Of course, the government also is pushing through its strike legislation over the next few months. So perhaps it's hoping to hold out that it won't actually have to agree a pay deal. But if that does happen, that's a very long time. And goodness knows how many strikes might happen between now and then. And as we are starting to realize, that can have a really significant impact on healthcare delivery and on patient safety. So it's a very risky game to play, to say the least.
Talking of strike action, if we just cross the channel and go to France, the Telegraph this morning are describing it as anarchy. And, you know, Bordeaux Town Hall is currently set on fire. The protests there are absolutely at a fever pitch because the public are so angry about Macron forcing through pension reform without a vote.
It's astonishing what's going on in France. There's a couple of different things going on. Of course, people aren't happy about the pension measure itself, about increasing the pension age by 2 years to 64, but people also are very unhappy with the way that this is being done. Effectively, the Prime Minister, Elizabeth Borne, seems to have triggered a clause in the Constitution which allows her to force this measure through, even without what some would say is the proper democratic consent. And the French public are absolutely furious. We've got buildings on fire. We've got huge crowds gathered in the Bastille Square in Paris, waving flags and so on, protest songs, incredible scenes for what I would say is probably quite a moderate pensions policy that the French government is going to have to pursue at some point, just to make sure that its economy remains viable and it can keep continuing to pay the pensions bill. When you compare it to this country, of course, pension ages are much higher already, and the government talking about raising them even higher without people going into the streets and burning down buildings. So this is an issue that the French feel incredibly strongly about, and neither side, neither the government or the protesters, is showing any signs of backing down over this at the moment.
Not at all. 9 days of sort of mass strike action and absolute fury on the streets, and fire, tear gas. We know what it's like in France. I lived there actually for 2 years in the city of Lyon. So I know what it's like to be right in the heart of the French strikes. I moved there in the midst of the Gilets jaunes, and it feels like we're going back to those times again. Jason Reed, thank you very much for going through the papers with me this morning, the UK lead at Young Voices and political commentator. It's been fantastic to have your insight.
Thanks so much, Rosie.